This is an overview of the Toshiba NB305 portable netbook. And here it is up close. Launched in January 2010, the NB305 has been around for a good year or so, but it's still available to buy brand new today. And as it's been around for a year, typically it's a bit cheaper than the most up-to-date models. And as you can see, Toshiba have gone for quite a glossy exterior to this netbook. You can get it in various colours, but it's typically quite pleasing to the eye. In terms of weight, the NB305 is 1.33 kilograms, which is pretty comparable to the alternatives that are out there. The ports, you have your standard VGA port. Note that there's no HDMI port with this netbook. You have your Ethernet port here, connect the netbook into a router, for example. USB port here, you have another 2 on the other side, so that takes the total number of USB ports up to 3, which is pretty good. You have your SD card slot as well on the end. On the other side, you have your headphone and microphone sockets here, 2 more USB ports, and you have your power connection socket there, and also space to lock your netbook with a Kensington lock on the end. Okay, so opening up the NB305, the first thing you'll probably notice is that we've got a glossy screen with this one. Some netbooks just go for the glossy option, others don't. The advantage of a glossy screen is, well, I think colours are pretty bright and vibrant. The downside is, well, you're going to get reflections, and particularly if it's a bright sunny day, sometimes it can be quite off-putting. You have your typical readouts here to let you know what's going on at any particular time. At the front, various different colours. You have quite a good sized trackpad here. It's bigger than some of the other netbooks that I've looked at. It's a pretty good trackpad. You've got what they call a chiclet keyboard, and you also have your standard on and off button at the top here. It's powered with an Intel Atom N450 processor, and this version takes 1 gigabyte of RAM, but you can extend that up to 2 gigs if you wish. It has a 250 gig hard disk, and the resolution of the NB305 is 1024 by 600, although if you connected it to an external display, you can get that up to 1400 by 1050. The NB305 also says that it can get 11 hours of battery life. I haven't been able to get that myself, and it also depends upon what you're actually using it on for. So if you're watching films, for example, the battery life is going to be somewhat shorter than that. Also, this netbook typically comes with Windows 7 Starter Edition. So going into a bit more detail concerning the actual keyboard on the 305, it's certainly a very nice keyboard to look at, and I think the keys are pretty well spaced apart. Although in practice I'm not 100% happy with typing on this keyboard. I found that quite often when I've been typing, not all the keystrokes have been registered, and I quite often find myself just double checking on the screen to see that what I've typed actually does appear. Now I think this is something that might be rectified with continued use, and you get a bit more used to the amount of pressure required to actually hit the key to ensure that the key does get registered. There certainly appears to be a lot of keys on this keyboard. I don't know if it's more than what is normally found, but it's worth noting that the enter key is a bit smaller than most other netbooks, and I quite often find myself accidentally pressing the backslash key when I want a carriage return, which can be a bit annoying. You also have all the function keys which double up for other purposes, like you can change the brightness of the screen, for example, by using the function key as well as the F keys. You can also change the volume control using function 3 and function 4. The trackpad itself is pretty standard. It's pretty easy to use. It's also multi-gesture, which makes life a lot easier. So to point out a couple of other things with the NB305, with regards to battery life, typically you're going to get about 7 to 8 hours of life, and that would be on, say, moderate brightness, moderate volume, and not doing anything which is too processor intensive. So that would be, for example, surfing the web. If you're watching video and you have it set to maximum brightness and volume, that brings the battery life down to about 4.5 hours. One thing I have noticed when comparing this netbook to others is the sound isn't that great. It sounds a bit tinny, and it's also a bit quieter. So that is one thing to note as well. Now, I thought it would be useful to point out a couple of alternative netbooks that are available. This one at the top is the Toshiba that I've been talking about. Beneath that, I've got a Samsung N150 netbook, and at the bottom here I've got an Acer Aspire 1 D255. And if you put them all on top of each other, you'll immediately realise, as you probably might know already, that they're all pretty much the same size. They're very similar in terms of dimensions and also similar in terms of weight. The other thing you will also notice is the actual ports are very similar as well. So if I go in here, you can see they've all got VGA options, they've all got USB ports, none of them have HDMI connectivity. So it even feels like all the different manufacturers kind of agreed about what ports and what functions to put on their netbooks. Now, this applies specifically to netbooks within the same price range. So if you pay a bit more money, you're going to get maybe some more functionality. But in the price range, say, of £100 to say £250, typically the netbooks are going to be all rather similar. And the differences really are going to be mostly down to aesthetics rather than functionality. In terms of performance between the various netbooks, after benchmark testing each one, the Toshiba NB305 and the Samsung have pretty much the same performance. They both, if you use a benchmark testing tool such as what you can find on, I think it's passmark.com, both these netbooks came out with a score of 235. And the Aspire 1 came out with a score of 295. But that's not so surprising because the Aspire 1, the D255, is a slightly newer machine. It's got an Atom N550 processor as opposed to the N450 processors on the Samsung and the Toshiba. But realistically, in terms of performance, you're not going to see much difference between the various netbooks. And really, I think the choice typically should be made upon which you find the easiest to use as opposed to which you think will be quicker to run. In terms of price, the Toshiba NB305 here can be purchased brand new for around about £250. Now, it can be bought cheaper if you went for a refurbished model, and that would bring the price down to between £150 to £200. And lastly, cheaper still if you try to buy this netbook second-hand or used. Depending on the condition, you could probably pick it up for between £100 to £200. Now, as I briefly showed you earlier, the Samsung N150, now the price of this netbook is very similar to the Toshiba. To buy it brand new, you're typically talking about £250. One thing it is worth mentioning with this Samsung N150, the screen itself isn't glossy, which means you're not going to get the reflections on the screen, which is quite nice. But also, I think the colours don't quite stand out as much. So, depending upon your preference of screen choice, might make a difference in terms of choosing between the Toshiba or the Samsung. Lastly, here we have the Acer Aspire D255. Now, this netbook is slightly cheaper than the other two. You can pretty much pick it up brand new for about £200. So it's about 50 quid cheaper, and again that will have an impact on the cost of buying it refurbished and second-hand as well. So that's my overview of the Toshiba NB305 portable netbook. In conclusion, I would say it's a pretty good netbook. It stands up very well to its competitors, does exactly what I'd expect it to do. In terms of drawbacks, I would say that I find the keyboard frustrating, missing the keystroke sometimes, and getting the enter key mixed up with the backslash key can be a bit frustrating when you're touch typing. The sound is also another drawback. I find the sound better on some of the other netbooks I looked at. The screen is excellent. It's a really good screen with clear colours, though the fact that it's glossy means you do get reflections in varying light conditions, which can be a bit annoying. It'd be nice if it had a 3G SIM card slot, and it would also be excellent if it had a backlit keyboard, but maybe that's not practical considering the cost of a netbook such as this. But I think out of the netbooks that I've looked at recently, between the Toshiba, Samsung and Acer, I would probably go for the Acer because of its cheaper price and greater capabilities. But saying that, the Toshiba is still a pretty good netbook, and if you can get it at a good price, I think it's one definitely worth getting. I hope you enjoyed this overview, and if you'd like to check out some more reviews, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is TechSaver UK. Thanks.